I would like your assessment of how the war began, where it's at, and where it's going.
Well, it's interesting that you asked that question up front, because I just finished watching Zelensky speak to various parliaments as well as our own Congress, urging everyone to rescue Ukraine on the grounds that we were faced with something similar to Pearl Harbor. And it struck me that this entire event has been turned into a wag the dog moment, because it just doesn't bear any resemblance to reality. Carefully omitted from the discussion are the last 30 years of experience that the Russians have had with us and with the West, not the least of which is the last sort of 15, really going back to 2007, when Putin came to the Munich Security Conference and essentially outlined his objections to what we were doing in the expansion of NATO. And he's kept up that drumbeat ever since. He was not the first, by the way. Yeltsin actually asked, "What are we doing?" And of course, half the time he was not compos mentis, as we now know in any case, but nevertheless he did. And we always told him the same thing: well, don't be concerned about this. This is no threat to Russia. And the point was, well, wait a minute, you told us that when we evacuated Eastern Europe, we pulled all of our forces out, that you would not follow, that you would not try to fill the vacuum. And when the decision was made to bring in Poland, there were lots of people in Europe who said, you know, this is very dangerous, because the Poles so thoroughly hate the Russians that we're inviting a country into the alliance that could conceivably become one day a catalyst for conflict with Russia. Of course, that was all brushed under the rug, so to say. So here we sit after the coup of 2014, when we systematically installed a new leader in Ukraine, backed new forces in that country that were unalterably, irretrievably hostile to Russia. And we've been building Ukraine into a base for the projection of either direct military power or subversion against Russia ever since. So finally, after pleading and trying to get people to listen, I think Putin decided he had no choice. He was afraid that no matter what we said, eventually we would bring in Ukraine and we would have missiles and forces on his border, the way the Soviets had put missiles and forces in Cuba, 90 miles from the United States. So he felt he had no choice. He had to go in. Now, we can debate how it's being done and so forth, but I do have sources that I talk to over there, and certain things are clear. First, they were very restrained during the first 5 days because Putin had given strict orders that they were to avoid at all costs civilian casualties, that they were to limit damage to infrastructure, buildings, property, homes. After 5 days, they accomplished most of their immediate objectives, but they then began the process of hunting down and destroying Ukrainian forces, which they've succeeded in doing to the point where Ukrainian forces have now been driven into cities and towns where they're encircled, can't get out, can't move, can't be resupplied. And it's no accident that the Ukrainian forces have done this, because the civilian population provides immediately a shield. Because Putin has decided that when this is over, he wants to be able to live with the people in eastern Ukraine, whom he regards as largely indistinguishable from his own. We don't seem to understand that. So you're talking about headlines. I read a headline today that said that the Russians had deliberately halted the movement of people out of Mariupol through a humanitarian corridor. Well, I know that's not true, because yesterday I was sent video from Eastern Europe showing Ukrainian troops preventing people in Mariupol from moving through the corridor that the Russians had set up. And there are 3,000 members of the Azov battalion or regiment or whatever they call themselves. They're fanatically anti-Russian, and they won't let people leave the city. This sort of thing isn't reported. All we hear is sort of a black and white picture. On the one hand, we have Zelensky, who's now competing with Mother Teresa for the Nobel Prize. And on the other side, we have Vladimir Putin, who is in the pantheon of evil men along with Stalin and Hitler. It's just not that clear. It's not black and white. And there's no one interested in examining the truth. So if you speak up and you suggest any alternative to the narrative, you end up in the penalty box. You're taken off Twitter. you're excluded from the airways, your material isn't printed. It's not a good thing.
Well, it's really, it has been going on like with the COVID war. If you said anything contrary to what the government was shooting out, then you were blacklisted on the social media. And you weren't allowed to be on any of the other media. The only people they would bring on is a Fauci to keep selling his false crap. And if you said anything that was against what the drug dealers were selling, then you were banned. So this is the censorship of what used to be America, the land of the free. And what you were saying, for example, I read that 20 people were killed, 36 more were injured this past Monday in the Donetsk Republic from missile attacks by the Ukrainian troops. None of that made the media.
No.
It never made the media that since the overthrow, and by the way, this is the Trends Journal from spring of 2014, detailing the United States coup of Ukraine as it was happening. So all the facts are here. As a matter of fact, there's a great article in here by Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, who was Reagan's a former assistant Treasury Secretary. Washington is driving the world to the final war, and about how a lot about the overthrow of the democratically elected government of Viktor Yanukovych, and how Victoria Nuland, an undersecretary under Obama and another undersecretary now under Biden, boasted that Washington had invested $5 billion to NGOs, non-governmental organizations, to, quote, teach democracy to Ukraine. This is in 2013. Anybody could Google it up. Victoria Nuland, 2013, Washington, D.C., and she's giving this talk over in D.C., and over one shoulder is signed Chevron, and the other one ExxonMobil. Yeah, you can't make this up. And again, like I say, you think the United States would have invaded Iraq and Syria and Libya if their major export was broccoli? You know. So,
well, the way we're headed right now, we may be grateful for broccoli, and that's what a lot of people don't understand.
Well, we may not be able to afford it. You know, that's all we could eat because these sanctions are only hitting we the people. And again, I just had Judge Napolitano on, and he was talking about how illegal and unconstitutional these sanctions are, and that they're not doing anything, by the way, to do it. You mentioned Cuba, the missile crisis. We've had Judge Napolitano mention we had sanctions on Cuba since 1962. Has it changed the government? Has it changed the government of Iran? Has it changed the government of Venezuela? No, it only hurts the people. And it's hurting us too.
You just hit on something that is widely believed here in Washington. You know, one of the problems we have in Washington inside the bubble, some people call it Versailles on the Potomac, is that they believe their own nonsense. They're drinking their own Kool-Aid. It's gotten to the point where people in Washington truly believe that Russia is now on its last legs.
I know.
The Russian army is defeated, and that if we just continue to supply these Ukrainians and impose sanctions, that will bring down the Russian state and remove Putin from power. It's astonishing. After only 3 weeks.
Yeah, well, 3 weeks. The United States was only in Afghanistan for how many years? Yeah, 20? Operation Enduring Freedom. And you remember Mission Accomplished in the Iraq War. I mean, George Bush, you want to talk about a murderer and a war criminal. So many of us knew Phil Giraldi, the former CIA guy, that quit the CIA because they knew that they were lying about Saddam Hussein having weapons of mass destruction and ties to Al-Qaeda. How come they don't call him a war criminal? Here, this is another headline from the New York Times. U.S. will send more arms defying Moscow. Suppose the headline read, Moscow will send more arms defying U.S. during the Afghan, Iraq, Libya, and other wars. How would that headline read?
Well, more important, if we were supplying the drug cartels and Mexican insurgents with lethal weaponry for use against the United States, then we would have hundreds of thousands of people demanding immediate action.
Yeah.
We'd mobilize the entire Air Force and Army to go down and punish Mexico.
Yeah.
No, you're right. This is as I said, looks like a wag the dog moment. Yesterday it was interesting listening to Senator Marco Rubio, whom I normally don't hear much from, but he actually said something that was worth listening to. I guess even a broken clock is right twice a day. He said, Russia is not Iraq.
Yeah. Duh. And you were saying,
What an illuminating statement.